Ruby wasn't sure what to think. On one hand, she'd already lost a partner and what had to be the fastest time ever achieved since Beacon's funding. That was a little depressing. Even if it wasn't quite as traumatic as most people meant after having lost their partner. Weiss was still alive and kicking. Not to mention, talking. Oh, the talking. We'll continue on towards the temple ruins where the relics are supposed to be. As long as you follow my instructions, this grim-infested forest shouldn't hold any nasty surprises for us. Ruby mouthed along with her, rolling her eyes as the girl went on and on and on. She stopped with a start when the girl spun around, just managing to hide her mockery in time. Ruby, you may not be part of our team, but you can come with us so long as you keep quiet. I'm not so heartless as to leave a little girl out here alone. That's generous of you. She wasn't sure, really, since not only would she be faster traveling on her own, but probably safer too. All this noise was bound to attract Grim. Plus, she was hardly a helpless little girl. I know, the hairless nodded. Never let it be said that a Sneef family does not fulfill our charitable obligations. So yeah, here she was, casually thrown aside by the first person she'd ever made eye contact with, so that said person could have someone else as a partner instead. Ruby's replacement didn't look thrilled at the prospect either. If the slouched manner in which he followed after her was an indication enough, then the expression on his face was. She'd struggled to place it for a while. Wide yet vacant eyes, mouth slightly ajar, body moving as instructed, but without any sense of life. In the end, she'd realized it was the face of a man who'd just been told the unusual discoloration of his finger was a terminal disease, and that he had approximately 2 weeks to live. The occasional twitching above the eye also added to that said hypothetical man had been handed a big, fat medical bill as well. She could have argued Weiss's decision. Surely, there were cameras watching them. Otherwise, how did any teams get formed? She did feel disappointed that the girl had judged her so quickly, without her even getting a chance to show off her crescent rose too. If she pushed hard enough, then she could probably get Weiss back as her partner. Then again... Walk straighter. Stop slouching. The girl snapped at the blonde boy. You need to carry yourself with poise and respect. How is anyone supposed to respect you if you don't respect yourself? On that note, keep in mind that as my partner, your actions reflect on me. With that in mind, we'll be working to make sure you're at least in the top 3 male students within Beacon at all times, in all subjects. She didn't even look back as she spoke, for if she had, she would have seen the guy dropping lower and lower in his stance. I'll set out a study and exercise plan for you. If we take into account 2 hours each night to ensure your homework is at the standard I demand, that will leave you at least 5 hours of sleep each night. Doesn't the average person need 8? Ruby felt compelled to ask, coming to defense of the poor soul who had saved her from such a fate. He can't afford to be average, Weiss huffed. If he needs more sleep, then I suggest he sleeps harder. Now Jean, I understand that as a person who never intended to become a hunter, you probably feel weak and afraid, but you must have some skill if you were able to pass the entrance exams. As the person responsible for inspiring you, I'll be magnanimous and take you under my wing. Yay. Indeed. All you need to do is listen to every single thing I say and commit my words to memory. Always give your all and undertake training I set out for you. I'll soon have you up to the standard Ashnee expects of those that would stand beside them. You are too kind. Even to Ruby's naive ears, his voice dripped with sarcasm. I realize it's possibly my only fault and one that I'll fix in time. Ruby's eyes twitched. Either way, I understand that after meeting me face to face you would desire to emulate me, but I feel that I must warn you. She sighed and turned around, bringing the party to a stop. One hand came to rest on his shoulders, Weiss's eyes looking up into his with an almost comforting expression. You shouldn't try and compare yourself to me, Jean. While it is ambitious of you to reach so high, I don't want you to feel hurt when you cannot reach my level. There's no shame in settling for second place. Yeah, that, Ruby thought, as she watched the arrogant girl turn around and start walking away. A few leaves blew past them as the remaining two stood still, neither knowing quite what to say. Ruby sort of wanted her partner back. Sort of. You made eye contact with her first. Jean broke the silence between them, startling her slightly. She glanced up at his dark blue eyes, noticing how they were locked onto hers. The faculty have cameras around to watch us. I can testify that you saw her first, that way you can be her partner. I didn't make eye contact. She flushed as she said it, feeling bad for the lie even as every other part of her body screamed that it could live with the fib. But not with the heiress. Ruby. He sighed, and the pleased notion that he remembered her name was muted by panic. I know you made eye contact with Wyatt. Nope! You're telling me you both walked here with your eyes shut? Nope. Wait. No to what? That doesn't make any sense. Nope. Nope. She pretended she didn't see the way his eyes had narrowed into thin lines, nor the faint growl coming from between his lips. Come on, silly. We need to catch up with your partner before she leaves us behind. I still need to find a partner for myself, after all. I'm strangely okay with this, Ruby hummed to herself as she jogged after Weiss. I am so not okay with this. Jean thought to himself as he trudged through the mud behind his shiny new partner. Phase 1 of his plan complete. Sort of. He didn't have Pyrrha as a partner. That should have warranted some celebration, as cruel as it sounded. Looked like karma had come right back and hit him in the balls, however, by giving him possibly the worst person he could ever imagine instead. Was fate and karma in collusion as to his misery? Were they collaborating? That wasn't the important question. The biggest thing confusing him was why Weiss hadn't chosen Ruby. Nothing had changed from how things usually went. Ruby and Weiss had been at each other's necks, but that's how they always were. A few arguments later and they were usually the best of teammates. If you ignored the constant verbal ribbing anyway. This isn't an unsalvageable situation though. His eyes trailed from Weiss's back to Ruby's, who was skipping alongside him. The fact that she was still here meant that he could try and force them together in some way. If not by claiming rules, then by finding someone else to be his partner. If Weiss could change partners on the fly, then so could he. The question wasn't so much as who he should choose, but rather, who could he not choose? And that narrowed it down to the most of his old friends, many of which would be dragged into the battle against Cinder, through sheer minded stubbornness. Ruby would charge in head first. Blake had a grudge to settle. Yang would go wherever Ruby did. At least might be admirable to not getting involved if there wasn't anyone drawing her into it. But his old partner would be the worst. There would be no escaping her being chosen as the maiden candidate by Ozpin. Not with how strong she was. He absolutely could not be partnered with Pyrrha? Oh. The red-headed girl froze in place, almost like Jean had. She looked nervously back, as though she would have liked nothing more than anything to flee. Hey there, Weiss. Fancy meeting you here. Is one of these two your partner? Actually, no, Weiss began. Yes. John appeared behind the white girl as if by magic. His hand fell on her shoulder, both staking his claim and preventing her from running away. Yes! Ruby echoed, practically shouting. Pyrrha looked a little confused until Ruby coughed. Well, he is. Not me. Nothing is set in stone yet, Weiss coughed, The position is still open. In fact, why don't you and I become partners, Pyrrha? To her credit, the heiress looked a little embarrassed to say that, not meeting Jean's eye in the slightest. Any joy that she was maybe doing his work for him was quickly washed away when he considered the two alternatives. But you haven't made eye contact with either of them? Ah, well, it's kind of, let's just say, complicated. She fiddled with the hilt of her weapon. Would you believe me if I said I saw both of them at the same time? You should, Ruby chipped in, because it's totally the truth. Ruby, you're really bad at lying. Pyrrha sighed, one hand coming up to rub her forehead as she turned to regard them fully. She wore the ever-polite mask she always did, though he'd long ago learned to look beneath it. In truth, she looked a little frustrated, and he could figure out why. Well, it seems clear to me that one of those two must be your partner then. I suppose I should take whoever is left over, since, technically, after you they would have seen me first. I'll let you choose, however. Pyrrha was intelligent as ever, phasing the offer in such a way that made sure Weiss wouldn't be partnered with her. It wasn't Weiss's fault. She just made a mistake approaching Pyrrha from the professional angle. The championship fighter was in the market for a best friend, not a potential sponsorship deal. And if Weiss chooses badly, that might end up being me again. The white-haired girl turned to look at the two of them. Jean felt himself nudge slightly as Ruby promptly hid behind him, face pressing into the small of his back. How can you consider harder? She's practically telling you to pick me. He wasn't going to beg. He wasn't some kind of dog at the pound trying to catch Anona's attention. A bead of sweat appeared on her forehead, dribbling slowly down her elbow. What little ego he still had lay in tatters at his feet. I suppose I'll stick with Jean, she finally said, drawing a relieved sigh from him. That means you get the hyperactive 15-year-old. Yay! Ruby cheered as she sped over to Pyrrha, shaking hands with her so fast that the older girl seemed to vibrate. I get no Weiss. This is the best day ever. Oi, Weiss growled. And I get Weiss, Jean echoed in his head. This is the worst compromise ever. You have anything to add to that, partner? Her pale blue eyes seemed to glow as she looked at him. Jean laughed nervously, waving his hands in the negative. Thought so. Fine. So the two of you are partners and the same for us. Maybe we can still all end up on the same team. Anything is possible, Pyrrha hedged with a polite smile. Do you know where the temple is? I must admit I've been more focused on trying to find a partner than making my way there. It's north of here. Weiss smirked. I made sure to get a good look as I was maneuvering from my landing strategy. There's a clearing around the temple, so it stood out easily enough. Follow me. Weiss? Pyrrha held one hand out as the proud girl stomped away. That's west. North is this way. What? But we've been traveling in this direction for the last 10 minutes. Weiss's eyes widened, made all the worse by Ruby's not-so-silent snicker. The red-faced girl spun on Jean. Why didn't you tell me we're going in the wrong direction? Because you told me I should just follow your instructions and learn from your example. He added a smirk for extra sarcastic effect, waiting for the explosion. You're right. I'm glad you were listening. Well, you can't be blamed for following my instructions. Clearly, this is all just a terrible misunderstanding. Is she serious? Perhaps there was some moss growing on the tree wrong, just to trick you? You may be right. None of us can be blamed for such an event. He could already feel that special vein beneath his eyes twitching. Northwards then. And let's hope we all end up on Team Winter. Winter? Pyrrha asked as they pushed through the trees deeper into the forest. Of course! It's a wonderful name for the team. WNJR, with myself as the leader, naturally. Uh-huh. Pyrrha sounded interested, but her face painted a different picture. The J doesn't really fit, but if we imagine the bit at the bottom cut off, then it could fit as a T, at least from a distance. Why is my name the one to be butchered? He sighed to Ruby. Maybe the team ought to be called Team Winger instead. The small girl had to hold her hands over her mouth to hide her laughter. What was that, Jean? Nothing, Weiss. Nothing at all. Somebody help me. Where's Carden when I need him? At least somebody seemed pleased with the transition, that being Ruby, who had jogged up to Pyrrha in order to chat. He could tell the older girl was still a little uncertain. The way she held herself screamed that she was worried the young girl would be another fan. Well, screamed to him anyway. To anyone else she probably looked perfectly happy. Still, they would be good for one another. Ruby would help Pyrrha to break out of her shell better than he ever could. And Pyrrha could definitely handle Ruby's hyperactive nature. For the two of them, the partnership would be a win-win, even if neither realized that yet. It was actually a bit of a surprise. He'd never seen Pyrrha and Ruby partnered together, as far back as he could remember. It was his which was a little less stable. At any other time, Weiss would have made a fine partner. She's just as dedicated as I usually am, all training and no play. Problem was, he wasn't as he usually was, and it was too late to start now. Even if he buckled down and did everything to the best of his abilities, there was only so much that he could achieve in 5 or 6 months. If he died at that point, then he'd wake back up 5 or 6 months before Beacon again. It would still be far better to get expelled and live for another 3 or 4 years, enough time to make a real difference in the next life, of course. Weiss would totally understand that. I hate my lives. You're saying the temple is on the other side of this mountain? Weiss wasn't quite so certain as she looked up at the huge mass of rock and stone that had risen from the tree line. It was like the blasted thing had appeared just to spite them. Maybe? Pyrrha shrugged. I mean, we haven't come across the temple yet, and this cliff is north of us. I don't fancy climbing it, but we could certainly go around it. Travel around it? That would take hours. The headmaster hadn't actually specified a time limit for initiation, but Weiss wasn't foolish. There was more prospective students than there was places at Beacon. This test was as much to weed out the unworthy as it was to establish teams. If they arrived at the temple to find that all the relics had been taken? No. That couldn't be allowed to happen. The heiress of the Schnee Dust Company could not return in disgrace. Not after the boast that she had made to her father. What would it look like to fight so hard for independence, only to come crawling back weeks later asking for help? Climbing the mountain was out of the question as well. While a direct route would be faster than going around it, their clothing and equipment wasn't suited for such a task. There had to be another way. They couldn't be the only people to have fallen on this side of it. Her eyes widened as she saw something to the right, barely visible through the branches and foliage. Oh, we could take the direct route? She cheered, rushing through the trees with her future team hot on her heels. It was only about 15 meters further down that she broke the tree line to reveal what had caught her attention. Ta-da! A cave? Pyrrha asked, no doubt impressed with her find. Do you think it goes all the way through? Most caves do, Weiss nodded. Unless they are small alcoves and cut into the rock face, which this obviously isn't, then it makes sense that there would be an exit point. Look, she pointed to some vines on the outside of the cave. Vines? Ruby gasped. Why are we excited to see vines? Not the vines, you dolt. See how the leaves are blowing back and forth? as opposed to just one direction, that's a sign that there is some air coming from the cave, which means that there might be some monsters inside of it. The blonde man piped up. Its breathing is moving the leaves. That there must be an exit on the other side, she corrected with a roll of her eyes. Come now, Weiss, she rebuked. It wasn't a terrible guess, and he is new to this. You need to give him some time. But there could be a Grimm in there, he repeated, leaning forward to take a look inside. She couldn't see anything, and apparently neither could he. I've got a feeling this is a bad idea. No more likely a Grimm in there than out here, she argued. This was a Grimm-infested forest, after all. And they were also hunters, even if in training. Grimm were nothing more than an obstacle to be overcome, whether they were in a cave or outside it. Grimm don't need food or water, and so don't need shelter either. It's not like the cave is any more likely to hold one. Her studies were very, very detailed. She had the best tutors an Atlas could provide. Again, though, it wasn't completely stupid of him. He was at least trying to apply normal animal behavior to these monsters. Did I mention I have a bad feeling about this? Yes. Yes, you did. What if there's a giant deathstalker in there or something? Ruby snorted. The entrance is only as big as you appear. How would a giant deathstalker even fit inside? As much as Weiss hated to admit it, she was forced to nod along with the child's point. Really, he was worrying over nothing. I want it on record that I don't like this. Consider it on record. Weiss rolled her eyes as she walked into the cave, drawing forth her scroll for light. She heard Pyrrha and Ruby enter after her, and a second later, heard her partner's grumbling as he too gave in. See, no Grimm. Give it time, give it time. She ignored it as the cave wound on. Her SDC branded scroll gave off only a little light, enough to illuminate a small area around them, which they all huddled into. The cave was certainly a disgusting enough location for a Grimm. She couldn't help but admit. The air was thick and heavy with just a ting of moisture that spoke of damp rock and fungi. The walls also closed and opened every now and then, creating a claustrophobic sensation that forced them to squeeze together at certain points. It was definitely a hazard, but the fact the breeze was starting to get a little stronger told her they were coming upon the exit. An entire mountain, traversed in a matter of minutes. Once more, the Sneak family came to the rescue. It was only to be expected. Now, if only the air washing across her wasn't quite so humid. I see light! Ruby squeaked, making Weiss jump a little as she pushed by. She considered calling the girl back, but decided against it. There was a small prick of light ahead, though it almost seemed to be moving slightly. Likely the sun's rays shimmering in the difference between air temperatures. The hot air outside mixing with the cool air creates a hazy effect. Ruby? Her partner called. One hand held out to stop her. I think you shouldn't go running up to that light. Why? Weiss felt more than a little impish as she grinned. Is it a deathstalker? Ruby sighed as they sped through the forest, the agile girl idly ducking beneath a low-hanging branch. It would have been a fairly nice moment, were it not for the several hundred pounds of death chasing them. Nobody could have predicted this. Yeah, well, I predicted this. Are you two still arguing? Ruby cried, not sure which of them was worse. If she wasn't so focused on making sure she didn't trip over or run into a tree, then she would have sped off and left them all alone. Okay, she wouldn't have done that. Mostly because she wasn't one to leave a friend behind, but also a tiny bit because no one should have to admit to losing two partners in as many hours. Less talking, more running. Ruby does have a point. Pyrrha coughed, struggling to keep pace with the faster students, not burdened by armor. How about we consider who was right or wrong once we manage to escape this thing? What's there to consider? I was wrong. Ow! Ruby ducked as the Deathstalker burrowed into another tree, causing it to explode and sent splinters everywhere. Thankfully, she had a 6-foot shield jogging behind her, who was currently picking bits of wood out of his hair. Okay, fine, once we're away from this. Do Grimm actually get tired though? This one certainly wasn't acting like it was going to run out of steam anytime soon. Sure, they could try and hide or lose it, but it was destroying everything in its path. Where were they supposed to go? I see the temple ahead! Weiss gasped. We should definitely head there. Ruby looked up, just in time to see what looked like the tower, or the lower portion of a tower, however. It was nothing more than a circle of grey brick, dilapidated and broken. How will the ruined temple help us? Jean shouted back. We can grab the relics we need, obviously. We're being chased by a giant Deathstalker and you're still more worried about the exam? And you are not? She sounded incredible, or perhaps just disappointed. Remember, I won't allow anything but the best results from you. I see some people ahead. Ruby's own partner piped up, silencing the duo as Ruby strained her silver eyes to see. There were 4 figures, becoming more distant as they moved closer. It didn't take long for Ruby to identify the bright shock of solid gold hair. Yang! She cried, loud enough that the girl in question turned to see her. Her big sister waved happily, shouting her name back. Apparently they didn't realize what was lumbering after them. She shrugged. They soon would. Hey Ru! Yang didn't get any further, hair blowing back as 4 figures dashed past her. Ruby snatched a random chess piece, noticing the white-haired girl do the same. Hey Yang! Ruby yelped. Bye Yang! Bye? Yang watched her sister run off with a raised brow, only to turn back as the black-haired girl tapped on her shoulder. The quiet girl pointed back in the direction they had came from, just in time to point out a tree being hurtled towards them. God damn it, Ruby. Would anyone care to explain why this is chasing us? Ruby didn't recognize the black-haired girl with the bow, but didn't think this was the best time for introductions either. Not now that their party of 4 had become 8. She had to wince when the ruin behind them was practically blown up, showering brick and golden chess pieces around them. I hope we don't get in trouble for that. It was an unfortunate accident. Ruby winced. No one could have predicted it. I predicted it. She pretended not to see the dirty look Jean gave her. I'm open for ideas on how to stop it. I'll be sure to share any that leap into my mind. The girl sighed. Her head turned to the guy running beside them. I don't suppose you have any plans for this, do you? What's with the emphasis on you? Ruby thought to herself. It sounded like the 2 of them had history, and with the way she was acting, it wasn't a good one. Maybe they came from the same school, or had been bitter rivals in the past. Oh right! She's called Bethany! My name is Blake, how could you... She cut off, shaking her head as though she wasn't playing that game. We're going to have to fight it. This thing isn't going to just sit back and let us get away. If it's keeping half of us just fine, and the only ones who are going to get tired is us... Ruby nodded as the message was passed further through the group. There were a couple of sighs. Some half meant complaints, but there wasn't a single one of them that didn't realize the necessity of such an action. And if they managed to run all the way back to Beacon, the thing would just crush them against the cliffs. Break apart and surround it, Ruby called to the others. If we attack it from all angles, we can bring it down. Bethany, pass the message on to everyone else. It's... whatever. The girl rolled her eyes and started passing the message down the line. Ruby saw them all nod in direction, signaling their agreement to what was going to be a do-or-die moment. Scatter! Yang shouted, ducking off to the side as they all split into different directions. Ruby activated her semblance and shot to the left, so fast that the Deathstalker could barely register her. Crescent Rose deployed in her hands, the blade cutting a furrow into the ground as she used it to hold her flight, spinning her round to land on her feet, weapon at the ready, only to see the Deathstalker bound off into the trees, leaving them all behind. Ruby would admit to feeling just a little bit cheated. Well, she coughed, hiding Crescent Rose and trying not to look like she just pulled an epic combat pose and then had a monster ignore her. Maybe it wasn't chasing us after all. Ooh. The ginger girl jumped up and down. Maybe it wanted to be a hunter too, and it was following us so we could get one of those relics. Ren. We must have Mr. Fluffykins on our team. Nora. Please don't name it that. The man sighed. Don't worry, Ruby. The younger girl looked up as a hand fell on her shoulder, Pyrrha coming to stand beside her. There will be plenty of opportunities for us to show our skills later. Yes, sis. Don't sweat it so much. Yang came up to ruffle her hair, not even realizing how much she was embarrassing her in front of her new partner. All's well that ends well. Wait. Where's my partner? Every single one of them turned to look at the girl who had spoken, noticing the conspicuous absence of the blonde guy from earlier. Weiss was looking left and right, even going so far as to lift up one shoe and look under it. All's well that ends well. Why? Jean ducked back as the Grimm's huge stinger buried into the ground he'd once occupied. Grass and plant life rivering as poison was injected straight into the soil. The nature of why could have been applied to many things. Why did such a huge creature have a poisonous stinger in the first place, when its main source of prey was small enough to be crushed by it, rather than pierced? Why did such a huge creature live right next to a school that trained people to kill it? Had no one ever noticed it? Why was it in a cave in the first place, where the entrance was too small to even contain it? But for Jean, it was more of a why does this happen to me sort of thing. The plan had been so clever too. They would all scatter and surround it, and Jean, in his infinite wisdom, would scatter onwards, ergo, out of the fight entirely. It wasn't running. It was aggressive scattering, and if the others just so managed to kill it before it was his turn to have a go, well, that would have been a shame, but one he could live with if he tried hard enough. Except that fucking asshole decided to follow him, and only him, leaving all the other more powerful combatants behind. This is karma again, isn't it? He ducked behind a tree, only to wince as it reduced to sawdust and splinters not a nanosecond later. You know, the blonde called out almost conversationally, I'm supposed to be trying to fail this test. The tail came down again, slamming into the ground as this time Jean stepped closer to the beast's maw. Kuroko maw slid from its sheath, twisting in a two-handed grip as he swung it at the staggering stinger. There was a roar of agony as it reared back, bleeding stump of a tail falling angrily. Yeah, I know, right? That's sort of how I feel too, because there I was, just trying to live my normal life and fail. Quick step to the side to avoid the pincers. A hop over the other set as they tried to snatch his feet. And then you have to come along and go all violent creature of darkness on me. Okay. Those pincers were starting to get annoying now. Jean zucked underneath them with a sigh, rolling forward on one shoulder to pass beneath the two snippling mandibles. The creature's legs skidded, angrily as it tried to turn its heavily armored bulk back to face him. It stumbled, however, as Jean lopped off two of its right-hand legs. Do you have any idea? He sighed, circling the Grimm as it tried to turn to follow him, struggling with its unbalanced number of legs. How inconvenient it would be for me to die here? He was, what, 3 hours into initiation? That would be the most irritating redo-over ever. He wouldn't even get to try and avoid Beacon, basically coming back to where he woke up this morning, except that his family would once more be strangers, people he had no interaction with, who thought their son had abandoned them. He wouldn't have Coral, Hazel, Jade. He wouldn't have any of them. Some things change, Jean sighed, jogging a little faster around the flailing creature before cutting off another leg. Some things stay the same. There's no Nevermore for Ruby and her lot to kill. But I guess I'm always at least somewhat responsible for putting you down, aren't I? It screeched at him, the sound low and undaunting, filled with anger and, well, more anger. The Grimm really weren't very original, but that was for the best. It was the original ones you really needed to look out for, because those tended to be intelligent. Any last words? He sighed. The Deathstalker's mouth opened, spewing another high-pitched scream, only to go silent as Kurokomore's bit into its maw. Sheesh. Forgot I asked. It twitched and spasmed for another 10 seconds or so, legs slowly starting to crawl up beneath it, as its claws came to rest against its face. Now what? Jean wondered as he stepped off the decaying Grimm, sheathing Kurokomore's as he landed. There were always teachers watching over the students, so of this little display, he'd probably gone and secured his spot in Beacon. If Osmond hadn't gone and done that already. Such a pain. Damn Deathstalker wasn't even strong, for all we panicked about you every time, no matter what happens. You were always killed by fresh recruits. It didn't even matter that his training in this life was just about null. He'd had 0 training and 0 experience for the first time, and still managed to kill it. At the end of the day, the Grimm really weren't what he tended to die to. Except for when he met the really ridiculous ones. Like that one time he decided to try and save Beacon by fighting that dragon one-on-one. That hadn't been the best idea. On the right side, being turned into a smear had been a new experience. Jean bit back a yawn. All that running had taken its toll, not to mention the lack of sleep and dangerously early morning. Normally he liked to wake up at the crack of dawn. This was going to be a rough transition. Speaking of home, Jean looked down at his scroll with a smile. It couldn't hurt, and he doubted there'd be much time later. With a small sigh, he knelt down, sitting back against some tree roots before kicking his legs out before him. The grass was soft and untouched, while the canopy above sent tiny droplet specks of sunlight dancing across his skin. The grim-infested places were the most beautiful, a testament to the way mankind liked to destroy and change the landscape around them. Jean! The screen flickered to life as the call went through. Sable's bright blue eyes lit up as she saw him, the girl waving at the camera. He chuckled and waved back, lifting one hand up to his face as a toothy smile broke out. Oh, it's so good to see you. How's Beacon? Exhausting, sis. Definitely exhausting. Are we talking normal person exhausting, or Jeanne d'Arc exhausting? She teased. Because one tends to involve heavy lifting, while the other sometimes just involves walking to the bathroom. The former. He sighed. Up at 7, rushed breakfast straight into a monster-filled forest. I'm not sure why anyone would actually want to do any of this for a career. Enough about that anyway. I want to hear about home. Things aren't bad here, she said, and it was the not bad which had his eyes softening. We all miss you. Which is odd since we normally wouldn't even see you at this time in the morning, but just yesterday, Sapphire went into your room to wake you up for lunch and she sort of just stood there. Mum thinks this counts as the first time one of Sapphire's chicks has left the nest, and she doesn't know how to deal with it. Tell Saf I love her. A pointed cough came through the scroll. And all of you as well, naturally. Damn right. Sable flicked some of blonde hair behind her. Only the frown as it came back down to her hand before her left eye. Her bangs had always been a defining feature of hers, no matter how much she tried to control them. Coral's been moody as well, though she'll hardly admit it. Someone tried to ask her out yesterday. I hear the guy will make a full recovery in time. Physically, anyway. Ouch. Poor guy. At least she hadn't said yes. That would have led to even more physiological trauma for the man. Mum's been cranky too. Stalking around the house like a real Beowulf. Dad had to go on a mission, so he's not even here to calm her down. Hazel said she looks like she needed a good some alone time. You can imagine how well that went. She alright? Who? Oh, Mum's fine. Managed to work out some of her frustration chasing Hazel around the house. I was talking about Hazel. She'll make a full recovery in time. Sable grinned. Physically, anyway. Why are all the women in my life so violent? He sighed dramatically. Felix aside, it was actually a rather odd question. The kindest person he knew was probably Velvet, and she was an absolute monster when she was in a bad mood. Plus, the whole stealing everyone's weapons and fighting style whenever she felt like it. That's like a bad driver asking why accidents keep happening to him. We're violent because you make us violent. Please tell me you haven't slept with someone already. Such faith. He grinned, enjoying the way she slammed her hand onto her forehead. Even I need at least a day or two, Sable. You must really have a low opinion of the women here to think they'll jump on the Jean Express so soon. Or maybe, just a high opinion of my abilities. Please, don't name it, brother. Choo choo, all about the Jean Express. Someone coughed from nearby. Anyway, make sure Amber doesn't wreck my room, okay? The last thing he needed was to hear that how she organized some kind of girls' party in there or something. The little brat. He loved her, but she'd better be prepared to run if he found unicorns drawn on his wall. Amber won't do anything, Sable laughed. She acts like she's glad to have the extra room, but I think she just wants to be closer to her brother. Sable cooed through the scroll. Jean's expression echoed it, a soft "aww" running through his head. Hang on, Sable, he sighed, turning with a frown. Do you mind? Jean? Sable's voice came through the scroll, wondering why her brother was so quiet. Please. Washni smiled, the jester filled with teeth. By all means. Don't let me distract you from what must be a very important conversation. We can wait. Behind her stood the rest of the two groups, though none looked prepared to step between the two of them. Likely because none of them were that stupid. Hey, Sable, I gotta call you back later, okay? Wait, have you been eating properly? Yes, I've been eating properly. He sighed. Have you made any friends yet? Another question. This time loud enough for everyone in the quiet clearing to hear. Weiss's eyebrows seemed to rise even higher, threatening to take flight and leave her face entirely. Yang was snickering, however, while Ruby looked on in that sort of I know your pain way. Sort of? You did have a shower and wash yourself properly this morning, didn't you? Sable. He whined. What was he? A 7-year-old? Yes, I had a shower. And yes, I know how to wash myself. Now I have to go. Bye. His thumb slammed down on the end of the call button. But not before she got in one final comment. Don't get anyone pregnant. Why am I not surprised? Blake sighed. Eyes flat. looking down on him as though he was some terrible insect that had dared to appear before her. Of all the impressions he'd made her, hers seemed to be the worst. Yang's snickers had turned into full-blown laughter by this point, even with her being awkward around him. It still didn't seem to change the fact he was, as always, her prime source of comic relief. Finish your call? Yeah, actually. Thanks for waiting. No problem. Where is the Deathstalker? Her shout frightened birds from the nearby trees. It was just his luck that it didn't summon a Nevermore. That would have saved him from answering. Naturally, if it were him, he'd have probably caught the attention of one if he so much as coughed. Deathstalker? He tried, only to wince as two deceptively small and delicate hands fisted in his shirt, lifting him back onto his feet. Big Grim? Chasing you? Did that? She pointed to where the Grim had chased him from, and more importantly, the rather obvious trail of destroyed trees and charred up soil, of which ended literally at this point, where he'd been sat. Could he say that he killed it? Easily enough. They might believe him. But then, that would also paint him as a competent hunter in training, which would mean they'd know he was faking it when he started to act in an attempt to get expelled. It tripped? It tripped. She did not sound impressed. Yeah, it was chasing me. Going absolutely crazy. I had no idea what to do, and then, as though by fate, it tripped on its own legs, and it fell to its death. Jean nodded, sagely crossing his arms. Truly, the creature was hoisted by its own petard. You expect us to believe, Pyrrha started, that you were chased alone and managed to bring it here, and continued. Well, after chasing us with no problem for so long, the Deathstalker, Weiss took over, which has 8 legs for stability, by the way, Blake added, just for good measure, tripped over Weiss again, to fall to its death. Yeah, Jean happily nodded. You're all acting like that's unusual. Grim are mindless. They don't exactly do well with strategy, and I, of course, being an intelligent, adaptable human, was able to use that to my advantage. He held his arms wide, as though inviting them to shower him with praise. You're covered in blood, Weiss pointed out. Don't worry, it's not mine. That's the point, you idiot. If it killed itself, then why are you all bloody and tired? Ah, that. The blonde hedged, fighting for an excuse. I also tripped and fell. Weiss's eye twitched. Did you hit your head on the way down as well? Should I see about taking you to the infirmary once we return? Why, Weiss? Are you worried about me? Deflecting with teasing. It had always worked before. Usually to drive her into a stammering mess if you suggested that she actually cared about you. Of course I'm worried about you. Don't you understand? Blue eyes widened. But she'd never. Can you imagine what it would look like if I were to appear back at Beacon with my partner having died? I'd be a complete laughingstock. And suddenly we're back in the real world. Looks like the two of you were getting on well. Jean had no idea how Ren managed to say that with a straight face. Maybe living with Nora had taken more impact on his friend than Jean had ever realized. There are 8 of us though, and if my guess is correct, we're going to be teamed with the corresponding relic pieces. Nora and I have a castle. The others all quickly started rummaging around for their pieces, eager to see how the teams had shaped up. By this point, Jean had already given up, knowing he was going to be stuck with some of them. Please, Ren and Nora, please, Ren and Nora, please, Ren and Nora, please, Ren and Nora, please, a lesser of 6 evils by far, please, 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 please. I have a knight. Weiss cheered. Damn it! The hairless ignored him entirely, instantly spinning to look towards Pyrrha and Ruby. Well, The latter was debatable, since she was still staring hungrily at the famous redhead. Ruby just came along as a package. "Castle," Ruby announced. "You idiot." Weiss screeched. "You picked up the wrong piece." "Somehow, I don't think I did," Ruby mumbled quietly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Then that leaves..." Jean sighed, all eyes turning to the final pair who walked reluctantly up to them. Yang looked like she wanted nothing less than to run away, not once meeting his eyes. Blake, on the other hand, settled for alternating not-so-subtle glares between him and Weiss. Great. This is just great. Reset by Deathstalker? Wasn't quite looking so inconvenient anymore. Destiny had managed to calm herself down by the time they made it back to the academy. What had started as an overflowing cauldron of bile had come down to a hot simmer, threatening to burst at any moment. Blake watched it all with veiled curiosity, hoping that Brat would have an aneurysm and go back to Atlas to recover. In fact, why wasn't she studying in Atlas in the first place? No doubt an attempt to expand their influence, paying their way into a new school so that the STC presence could be shared with Vale, Atlas's closest allies. Things would have been better. So much easier had the heirs picked somewhere like Minstrel instead. And even easier if she took him with her. Jean-Arc. She'd almost forgotten the name. She heard one of his family members say something, but at the time, that hadn't been what she was focused on. A mixture of emotional pain over severing her ties with Adam, mixed mortification at being caught with a naked man. He claimed he didn't remember her. How was that even possible? Who could forget nearly being killed by terrorists on a train? Or the fight they'd had with the deadly robots? Or that he had done all that in the buff, for crying out loud? How was any of that forgettable? She didn't trust him. Not one bit. Blake considered herself a good judge of character, at least when it came to combat ability. When she'd first seen him in that carriage, she immediately dismissed him as a civilian. It wasn't just the fact that he hadn't had a weapon at the time. He had one now, and her mind was still telling her he was a civilian. It was the way he carried himself. Half slouched over, arms swinging a little too much, or even the way he painted now. Winded by the climb back up the stairs, dug into the cliffside. Even though that had been a good 10 minutes ago, and they were now stood in an auditorium. That was the kind of stamina a normal, non-trained person had. He was no threat, of that her mind was certain. So why was she still so worried? Because he reminded her of Adam. It was a stupid thought. Incredibly stupid. The two were nothing alike physically, and from what she'd seen of his personality, well, let's just say if Adam had been anything like him, then it might have been a good thing for normal people. He was a flirt, a philanderer, and just an idiot. And yet, she couldn't shake that thought. He didn't have a stance, or at least he didn't carry himself with one. If he were to be attacked, then the best thing he could manage would be to fall on his rear and beg for mercy. Because with hands on both knees and bent over, there was no way he could draw his weapon in time. You're being paranoid. She shook her head lightly. It makes sense. He could ruin me if he actually remembered, but I can't keep assuming everyone is out to get me. She couldn't afford to spend the next 4 years jumping at every shadow, or seeing Adam in every person to come across her path. Ruby Rose, Pyrrha Nickus, Lyran, and Nora Valkyrie. The headmaster's voice drew her attention back to the proceedings. She had to bite back the tiniest smile when she saw the four walk onto the stage, though in truth the source of her amusement was the jealous grumbling by the Snee. I wouldn't mind being on that team either. You found and located the white castle pieces. Therefore, you now form a new team. Henceforth, you'll be known as Team RRNN, or Team Reuben, led by Ruby Rose. Scraping the barrel a bit there, Blake's partner whispered, clapping nonetheless. Blake followed her cue, guessing it was for the benefit of the blonde's little sister. Blake wasn't sure what she thought of her own partner either, to be honest. Loud, bright, and attention-grabbing. The girl was the antithesis of everything Blake was. But then again, maybe that could work to advantage. Who would notice quiet Blake Belladonna when they had this woman to focus their attention on? Shh! Snee hissed at the two of them, looking for all the world like she had the right to be mortified. Yang scowled, rolling her eyes, and immediately gained more than a few points in Blake's mind. Next, we have the White Knight pieces, which were selected by Snee, Jean-Arc, Gang Xiaolong, and Blake Belladonna. To her annoyance, there were a few whistles from the crowd as they climbed the stairs. She bore it with the bitter knowledge that would have been very different had she not been wearing her bow. The Snee looked like she reveled in it, however, nodding and smiling out towards the crowd. For collecting these pieces, the four of you will be placed together. Henceforth, you will be known as Team JWY, or Team Jazzberry. What kind of name is that? Blake thought of a grimace, noticing the rest of her team also looked less than annoyed with it. The only male on the team looked downright horrified, staring up at the headmaster with a very accusing gaze. Led by Jean-Arc. Wait. What? What? The Snee erupted. What little control she had on her temper, gone in an instant. What? Their new leader echoed, sounding just as displeased. The headmaster coughed. I said that... What? Everyone looked back towards Team Reuben. Everyone else was doing it. The ginger girl shrugged. Thank you, Miss Valkyrie. The man sighed. I said that Mr. Ark is the leader of Team Jazzberry. May we continue, or are there any more outbursts to come? You bet. A hand appeared across their leader's mouth, cutting him off as the white head of hair popped up before his face. None at all. We apologize. Weiss said, practically dragging John off stage. Many in the crowd were actively laughing at them now. Not that it bothered Blake any. It would have been nice to fade a little bit into the background, however, not draw attention to their team like this. The headmaster nodded, turning back to the crowd without missing a single beat. Then it is to my pleasure to welcome you all officially to Beacon. If you check your scrolls, you will find that you have each been assigned dormitories within the school, at which your scroll will act as a key. The speech went on a little longer, listing a few simple rules and how their lessons plans had also been sent to their devices. Blake listened to it all with only half her attention, the other half thinking back on all the things that had taken place today on what was the first day of her new life. So this is my team. The disguised faunus let out a sigh. A loud and attention-seeking blonde who seemed to go quiet around their leader, the heiress of the company which had oppressed her people for so long, who also no doubt felt she should be the leader and the one person who could ruin her life at Beacon, who might also be a pervert, mentally unhinged, or both. This wasn't going to be awkward at all. You didn't bring up their behavior in the Emerald Forest, Glinda Goodwitch pointed out as she sat across the staff room table from her superior. She caught the tiny curl to his lips, just from the edge of her vision. He hit it a second later, lowering the scroll he'd been looking at down on the table. Whatever do you mean, Glinda? I'm afraid there was a lot going on in the forest today. You need to be a bit more specific. So that was how he wanted to play things. I am of course referring to Miss Snee and her partner. That is, her original partner. You would not normally have allowed someone to change the decision in such a way. I hope this isn't some level of favoritism on your part towards the Snee Harris. Osmond chuckled. You know, I do not do anything like that, not where James might notice. The boy then. Glinda nodded. Ruby Rose and Jean Arc. 2 people you specifically sought out for entry into Beacon. I'm more surprised you didn't try to place them on the same team together. That might have been interesting. He paused to take a long sip of coffee. Ultimately, however, it seems that it was not meant to be. You know, I do not involve myself in the selection process, as easy as it would be to alter the trajectory of the launch pads. I wasn't accusing you of that, more that you allowed Miss Snee to break the rules in such a manner. If it were me, I would have had her drawn before the audience and forcibly placed with Miss Rose. And you would perhaps have been right to do so. It was infuriating at times, the way he would just shrug and say something like that. In truth, though, my motives are far less calculating than you believe. Miss Snee and Miss Rose simply do not get on well enough to foster teamwork, it seems. While I am sure that could have been fixed in time, it seems that they each decided it was better to take a different approach. The bridge has been burned. If I were to force them together now, I fear they might rebel. On the other hand, so long as they don't make a habit of it, there's nothing wrong with allowing this to slide. The Snee Harris is letting her colours show, Glinda sighed. It's one thing to think less of someone, but to judge so quickly. I wonder if that will lead to some early defeats in the rings. Such arrogance can lead to underestimating one's foe. If that was the case, then she would soon force it out of the girl. No one will be allowed to be so foolish in her lessons. Ozpin didn't even comment on it, simply looking at her in a way that said he trusted she would make sure that did not come to pass. That team, though, she sighed. I'm concerned about choosing him as the leader. From what you tell me, and what I've seen, it looks like he has problems with authority. Authority? Osmond's fingers played with the edge of his scroll. Or motivation. It's too early to tell at this point. Whatever the reason, I don't believe the team would work well together if Miss Snee were to be elevated above her peers. Glinda could only sigh, sitting a little lower in the uncomfortable chair as she squeezed the bridge of her nose. Initiation truly was the worst time to be a teacher. So much preparation, and so much work, so much upheaval, so little sleep. Perhaps the responsibility would provide some motivation. She wasn't sure, but surrendered to the point. At the very least, Miss Snee might be motivated to whip him into shape. I have to ask though, Ozpin, Jazzberry? The headmaster let out a laugh. It was not an easy team to name. Well, I suppose it will do. Glinda rolled her eyes, fighting back a yawn before climbing to her feet. If you'll excuse me though, I believe I'll be settling in for an early night. We'll see you tomorrow, Ozpin. Pleasant dreams, Glinda. He nodded back, watching as the exhausted woman let herself out. A yawn might have forced its way past his hand too, had he not brought the mug to his lips. Caffeine. Delicious and invigorating. Soon brought an end to that. Such intriguing teams this year. Not at all how he had expected. It was true that they did not interfere with the selection process. Trying to control things so directly had a nasty habit of backfiring. Besides, by far better for future hunters to have someone they could trust and respect by their side, rather than someone who only complimented their skills on a technical level. Once more, he reached down and pushed the play button on his scroll. The video whirled back into action, showing the moment a single young man had torn down such a fearsome creature. Ozpin wondered, as he continued to watch that recording, if Mr. Ark even realized how he had looked as he fought, what should have been the second rim he'd ever seen, and quite the dangerous one at that. for as the camera zoomed in on his face, Osborne could only hum at the apathy, the disinterest, the utter boredom Mr. Ark expressed. What an interesting year this is shaping up to be.